in ourselves. I always dreamed of the perfect wedding. A cascade of white roses, romantic candlelight, and that magical moment when the words "I do" would bind me to the man I loved. And on that day, standing next to David in a lavish ceremony surrounded by friends and family, it seemed like all my dreams had come true. We exchanged vows under an arch of flowers, sunlight filtering through the leaves, painting the moment with hues of gold. Our smiles were wide, and our hopes even wider. But like a small, indiscernible stain on a perfect tapestry, something was amiss. As we slipped rings onto each other's fingers, I caught the eye of Nancy, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. Her look was piercing, almost calculated. It wasn't the usual look you'd expect at a joyous occasion, certainly not from the mother of the groom. It was as if she could see through me, peeling back the layers of my personality like an onion and not liking what she saw. "I, David, take you, Susan, to be my wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health." David recited his vows, his eyes locking onto mine. I was momentarily lost in his gaze, soaking in the warmth of his love. "And I, Susan, take you, David, to be my husband," I responded, reciprocating his loving stare but still haunted by Nancy's icy glance. I put it in the back of my mind. This is my day, I told myself, don't let her ruin it. As we exited the ceremony to a shower of rose petals, Nancy approached us. "Congratulations," she muttered, her smile taut as if each word required a Herculean effort. "Thank you, Mom," David said, hugging her. "We're family now," I said, attempting to bridge the emotional chasm. "Indeed we are," she replied, her voice dripping with an insincerity so raw it was almost palpable. Despite the unease, I decided to let it go. After all, not everyone had to like me. I was married to David, not his mother. Plus, there were plenty of reasons one might not feel ecstatic at a wedding: pre-wedding stress, the realization that your child is growing up, or even just a general disdain for social gatherings. However, that look remained etched in my memory, a tiny splinter that I couldn't quite remove. Little did I know that this splinter would fester over time, culminating in a situation so poisonous it would threaten to shatter the idyllic life I'd envisioned. But for the moment, I was content. I had David. We were in love, and we were starting a new chapter of our lives. How bad could things get? I would soon find out that love wasn't the only binding force in a marriage. Secrets, resentment, and unspoken grievances also held their power, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their destructive might. And so, with a blissful smile and a hopeful heart, I stepped into this new chapter, blissfully unaware that the illusion of happiness could sometimes be just that, an illusion. Years whisked by like wind through the autumn leaves, so fast, yet each moment heavy with meaning. Our family blossomed with the arrival of our son, Ethan. His birth was one of those life-changing moments that redefines your sense of purpose. For me, it was a tidal wave of love, washing over the jagged edges of the relationship I had with Nancy, my mother-in-law. I was busy building a successful career, and David was, well, still figuring things out. It didn't bother me at first that David was unemployed. After all, everyone hits a snag in their career path. I was confident enough in my own career to support us while he looked for another job. "How was the job hunt today?" I would often ask David as we settled into our evenings. "Still looking. You know how it is," he'd reply, avoiding eye contact. I gave him his space, trusting he'd get back on his feet eventually. After all, I was busy, not just with work, but also with a toddler who was my little bundle of joy and chaos. Ethan's first steps, his first words, all the milestones, I savored each one. Nancy, ever keen on maintaining a role in her grandson's life, would often visit to babysit. Her role as a doting grandmother seemed to paint her in a different light. For the sake of Ethan, I welcomed her help, though my gut feeling about her hadn't entirely faded away. "Would you like to babysit Ethan this Friday, Nancy?" I would ask, attempting to normalize our relationship for Of course, I would never miss a chance to spend time with my grandson, she'd respond, her voice tinged with a warmth she never directed at me. During these visits, Nancy acted as if the house were her own, taking liberties that often left me uncomfortable. She'd rearrange the kitchen cabinets or give unsolicited advice about Ethan's upbringing. "Don't you think Ethan should be eating organic baby food? It's much healthier," she'd suggest, looking at the regular jars of baby food on the kitchen counter. "We're doing what we think is best for him, Nancy," I'd respond, swallowing my irritation. Deep inside, my instincts kept nudging at me, warning me not to let my guard down. But my outer self played the role of the accommodating daughter-in-law and ma and mother. Why rock the boat when it seemed to be sailing smoothly enough? Or so I thought. Despite the undercurrents of tension, the arrival of Ethan had offered a form of detense. Nancy was involved, but at arm's length. David was presumably still looking for a job, and I was navigating the maze of motherhood and a high-profile career. I wanted to believe we were a happy family, living under the same roof with the normal ups and downs that every family experiences. I pushed away the nagging suspicions that would surface occasionally. After all, I had a career that was fulfilling, a son who was the light of my life, and a husband who I loved. What could possibly shatter this picture? Unbeknownst to me, the threads holding this tapestry of familial bliss were already fraying, and it would not be long before they broke entirely, revealing the sinister patterns woven into its fabric. The years rolled on, and Ethan grew from a bubbly toddler into an energetic, curious child. School projects, soccer practices, and family outings filled our days. But as he grew, something else evolved alongside. Something far less joyful. The uneasy alliance between David, Nancy, and myself was straining, transforming into an atmosphere laden with subtle suspicions and unspoken concerns. David still hadn't found steady work. At first, I ascribed this to bad luck or a difficult job market. But when I stumbled upon some old company emails on our shared computer, things took a darker turn. There were allegations of theft, and Dave had been fired for it. "David, what is this? Why didn't you tell me about the theft allegations?" I confronted him one evening after Ethan was in bed. He looked cornered, his eyes darting to avoid mine. "Susan, it's not what it looks like. I was set up." "But why hide it? We're supposed to be a team," I insisted, the tremble in my voice betraying my disappointment. "I didn't want you to think less of me," he mumbled, his eyes finally meeting mine, filled with something that looked like regret. Or was it fear? This revelation tore at the fabric of trust we had, or at least what I thought we had. Around the same time, Nancy started visiting more frequently. Her relationship with David seemed closer than ever, their whispered conversations becoming a common sight. And then came that evening, the evening that shifted my uneasy suspicions into palpable dread. Nancy arrived carrying her usual tote bag filled with knitting supplies and mystery novels. What was unusual, though, was her announcement. "I thought I'd cook dinner for everyone tonight." "You cooking? That's a first," David chuckled, but I noticed he didn't look as surprised as one would expect. "Yes, I found a delightful new recipe I thought I'd try out on my favorite guinea pigs," Nancy said, flashing a smile that felt forced. Something about her words made my stomach churn. Nancy had never cooked for us before. She always claimed that her culinary days were behind her, and that she preferred to be served rather than serve. "That sounds great, Nancy," I said, forcing a smile. "Is there anything special you need for the recipe?" "Oh, don't you worry, dear. I brought everything I need," she responded, patting her tote bag in a manner that seemed a little too deliberate. It was when I was passing by her open bag that I saw it, a small glass bottle, half concealed by her knitting yarn and mystery novels. The label was turned away, making it impossible to see what it was. Something inside me twisted. My intuition was screaming at me to dig deeper, to confront the unsettling feelings I had been suppressing for years. This idyllic family picture I had fought to maintain was cracking at the edges, and I found myself at a crossroads. I could continue to paint over the cracks, to ignore the warning signs, or I could brace myself for the ugly truth lurking underneath. It was a decision that would upend my world in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and the choices I made from this point would determine whether I fell in or found solid ground on the other side. I chose to take the plunge, unaware of how deep the abyss truly was. The tension was palpable that evening as Nancy busied herself in the kitchen. Ethan was engrossed in a video game, blissfully unaware of the electric currents of anxiety zapping through the air. David retreated to his man cave, a sanctuary filled with unread books and uncompleted projects, leaving me to deal with the emotional quagmire that was rapidly taking shape. Taking a deep breath, I ventured into the kitchen under the pretense of helping Nancy with dinner preparations. As I entered, she was stirring a pot on the stove, her back turned toward me. "Do you need a hand with anything?" I offered. "No, dear, I've got everything under control," Nancy replied without turning around. She seemed entirely focused on her cooking, but there was an urgency in her movements, a kind of forced precision that felt rehearsed. Taking advantage of her distraction, my eyes darted to her tote bag, which was resting against one of the kitchen cabinets. My heart was pounding as I considered my next move. Should I let this unsettling evening unfold and see where it leads? Or should I seize the opportunity to dig into the enigma that was Nancy? "Actually, could you pass me the salt? It's in top cabinet," she requested. This was the diversion I needed. As I reached for the salt, I knocked over a jar of paprika, creating enough noise and chaos to distract her. Seizing the moment, my hand darted into her tote bag. My fingers found the small glass bottle, and I quickly glanced at its label. The word poison struck me like a lightning bolt. My head spun, and my stomach tightened into knots. This was no ordinary family dinner. This was a prelude to something dark, something heinous. I had to talk to David. Whatever mistrust had been festering, he was still my husband. Surely he wouldn't be a part of something this sinister. I found him in his sanctuary, engrossed in his phone. "David, we need to talk." "It's urgent," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. "What's the matter?" He looked up, startled by my tone. "I found this in your mother's bag," I blurted out, showing him the bottle. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me she's not planning what I think she is." He stared at the bottle for what felt like an eternity. Then, instead of the shock or concern I expected, a slow, unsettling smile crept onto his face. "Susie, don't let your imagination run wild. You've been reading too many of those thrillers," he chuckled dismissively, laying his phone on the table and standing up. "Let's go have dinner." His reaction was a cold splash of reality. He knew. They both knew. I was the only one in the dark, and I had no choice but to bring everything to light. As I walked back to the dining table, each step felt like I was sinking further into a swamp, the weight of betrayal dragging me down. Dinner was served, and we all sat down, the atmosphere thick with unsaid words and unasked questions. David and Nancy exchanged quick glances, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding. My heart was pounding as I looked at the food on my plate, knowing that it might be laced with a substance meant to silence me forever. The moments ticked by like hours, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. It was now or never. If I was right, this was my chance to tear away the facade that had masked the ugly truth for so long. If I was wrong, my marriage, my family, my entire world would crumble into a heap of misguided suspicions and irreversible actions. Summoning every ounce of courage, I made my decision. It was time for the veil to be lifted, for the illusion to be shattered. Whether I was ready or not, the moment of reckoning had arrived. I stared at the plate before me, its contents innocent, looking but potentially lethal. Ethan was chattering away about his latest video game, and for a brief moment, I considered the life he would have if something happened to me. I felt a tug in my gut. No, this had to end tonight. David and Nancy watched me like hawks, their eyes flashing conspiratorial glances. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my fork and pretended to take a bite, but subtly slipped the food into my napkin. I then clutched my chest, letting out a gasp, and fell to the floor, clutching my stomach and coughing dramatically. "Mommy!" Ethan shrieked, his face turning pale. David and Nancy exchanged another quick glance, and then David spoke, his voice eerily calm. "Don't be afraid, it's okay." What kind of father reassures his child when their mother is seemingly in distress? The audacity, the sheer cruelty of it boiled my blood. I had to end this farce. Summoning all my energy, I leapt up, my eyes blazing. David and Nancy looked startled, then wary. "What are you talking about?" David asked, attempting to sound innocent. "Don't play dumb. I found this." I hurled the small bottle of poison onto the table, watching their faces drain of color. So what was the plan? To get rid of me and live happily ever after with my money and my son? David stuttered. "Yes, Susan, you've got it all wrong." "No, David. I've got it all right for the first time in years." "And you, Nancy?" I turned toward her, my eyes narrowing. "You should be ashamed. What kind of mother aids her son in such a horrific act?" Nancy finally spoke, her voice shaking. "You don't understand, Susan. David needed someone who'd be on his side, not some controlling wife. So you thought murder was the solution? Destroying your grandson's family?" I was incredulous, disgusted. "I thought it was time you knew your place," she hissed. It was a standoff, a showdown of wills. The room was thick with tension, a battlefield with scars that would never heal. I had drawn my line in the sand, and now there would be consequences. "I'm calling the police," I declared, my voice unwavering. "You two can explain your family values to them." I dialed 911, my fingers shaking, but my resolve steady. The operator assured me that officers would be there shortly. As I hung up, I looked at David and Nancy, their faces masks of fear and regret. The facade had crumbled, the illusion shattered. Ethan clung to me, confused and frightened. "Mommy, what's happening?" I hugged him tightly, whispering, "Don't worry, sweetie, I've got this." When the police arrived, I presented the bottle of poison and narrated the evening's events. David and Nancy were handcuffed and led away, their faces a mix of shame, disbelief, and a grim realization that their twisted plot had unraveled. I watched as they were put into the police car, a surge of relief washing over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The web of deceit had been torn apart, and I was free. But freedom came at a price. The shattering of my family, the end of my marriage, and a son who would have to grow up knowing his father was a criminal. Yet, despite the high cost, it was a price I was willing to pay for the truth, for justice, and for the safety of my child. As the police car drove away, I turned to Ethan, my eyes meeting his innocent, questioning gaze. "We're going to be okay, sweetie. We're going to be more than okay," I assured him, my voice tinged with a newfound strength. And so, we stepped into a future unburdened by lies. A future where the monsters had been unmasked and banished into the light. It would be a difficult road ahead, but it was a road we would walk with our heads held high. After all, the truth had set us free, and that was worth any price. In the days following the arrest, the house seemed to breathe easier, as if it too was relieved to be rid of its toxic inhabitants. Lawyers came and went, and detectives interviewed me multiple times. Ethan was confused but resilient, trusting that whatever his mommy was doing was for the best. My lawyer assured me that with the evidence at hand, David and Nancy would be facing severe penalties. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. Soon, justice would be served. The door opened, and David was led in, handcuffed and dressed in a prison jumpsuit. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the man I thought I had married, lost, regretful, broken. But it was quickly overshadowed by the man he had become. Nancy was brought in next. She avoided eye contact, her posture not as upright as it used to be. I could see that the gravity of their actions had finally sunk in, and the weight was bending them. The trial proceeded with testimonials, evidence presentations, and legal arguments. It felt surreal, hearing my life being discussed like a plot from a crime drama. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked. "I do," I responded, my voice steady. "Mrs. Susan, can you recount the events of the night in question?" my lawyer prompted. As I narrated the horrifying tale, I watched David and Nancy closely. Their eyes were downcast, their faces flushed with shame. Finally, the moment of reckoning came. The judge looked down at his notes, cleared his throat, and spoke in the case of attempted murder. "I find the defendant, David, guilty as charged. I sentence him to 6 years in federal prison." David let out a stifled sob, his face a canvas of disbelief and defeat. Turning to Nancy, the judge continued, "And for the crime of aiding and abetting in attempted murder, I sentence you, Nancy, to 4 years in federal prison." As the gavel came down, sealing their fates, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Relief that justice had been served, sorrow for the love that had been tainted, and a fierce joy that my son and I were finally safe. Before they were led away, David turned to me, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Susan. Sorry for everything. You should have thought of that before," I replied, meeting his gaze with a resolute finality. Nancy said nothing, her eyes cold, her expression unreadable. As I left the courtroom, Ethan ran up to hug me. "Is it over, Mommy?" "Yes, sweetie, it's over. We can finally start anew." In the months that followed, Ethan and I did start anew. The hefty divorce settlement, thanks to a solid prenup and David's criminal actions, meant we were financially secure. We moved to a new city, started attending family therapy, and began rebuilding our lives. Ethan enrolled in a new school and made new friends, his resilience shining through. I took a deep dive into my career, finding satisfaction and purpose that I hadn't felt in years. But most importantly, we found peace. Peace in our home, peace in our lives, and peace with